Hollywood and Sip. I'm your host, Kat Smith. With me today is Frances Causey, who is the filmmaker behind a really important film, The Long Shadow. Welcome to the show. I wanted to
Thank
give
you for having
some,
me on. Great to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to give you a little backstory as to how I found you. With all of the Black Lives Matter issues at hand and all of the protesting and all of the things, it really sparked in me an awareness of how much I really don't know. And so I've begun a journey of studying things, and as things come up that I don't understand, I've been researching them. And so it's part of that. I share things to Facebook, as many people do, and that has come with both positive and negative, I have found. But I just feel like if I don't know this, there must be at least a 100 people that I know that don't know it either. And so I've been sharing. And in that, I got an email from a friend named Sherry. And she saw your film a while back at an indie movie theater in Marin County. And she said, it's an excellent film on racism and why problems still exist today. And I said, well, that's great. If she loves it, I know I need to talk to the filmmaker. And since then I got the film and I watched it. It is it's a very important film for this time. One of the things that struck me was we had no idea that 2020 was going to hit us. And your movie released, was it 2017?
Yeah, it premiered at the Mill Valley Film Festival, but only this year did it begin to air on PBS. So it took a while for the film industry to understand the film and what it was saying. And it's going really strong now, still on PBS. And then we're also offering the film on multiple digital platforms as well as our own website. So we're rocking.
So I think it's a really important time to be watching this film. So it's very convenient that it's out there and available now. And why don't we just start with what prompted you to make this film, and what's the story you tell in it?
Right. Kat, so, I had grown up in the South, and my producer is also from the South. And we had long been talking about, we made a film in 2011 called Heist, Who Stole the American Dream, which really investigated the decline in the American middle class and how that happened. And what we discovered there really corroborated what we had seen growing up in the South, which was this deep poverty, I think borderline apartheid-like conditions for African Americans in the South. And so we wanted to make a film about why that happened. And what we discovered in making Heist was startling numbers among African Americans, particularly in the South, that for every $1 an African American has, a white person has $10 in median income. And almost in every single category, African Americans were really struggling to keep pace, not even keep pace with white folks. And so we grew up as kind of daughters of the South, very privileged, but we had people who worked for us in our family, and we loved them deeply. And so it was just a film that we didn't necessarily have the choice to make. We knew we had to make this movie. And so Ferguson really kicked off when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson and the riots that were sparked by it. We knew we had to make the film. And so we started doing more research. And then that's when I discovered that my own ancestor, actually a guy named Edmund Pendleton, actually codified slavery. And what I mean by that is he was asked by the other founding fathers to take the colonial law, and as the United States was becoming the United States from being a British colony, he was asked to very kind of almost secretly, surreptitiously make sure that slavery was preserved. Because by 1775, 1776, you see that the backbone of the American economy was built upon slavery all over all over the 13 colonies, not just in the South, right? So the founding fathers knew it was very controversial. And so we go into what's in the movie is really kind of the imposition, often mostly violent imposition of this existing system of white supremacy, and how that impacted how it impacted all of us, but most specifically how it impacted the African community when they were first here, and then later the African American community. And we connect the dots, Kat, from really our founding and some of the myths around our founding to impact today.
I think something you said in there was really important about the surreptitious way that the wording was put in there. I think watching the film, you can see how there's several points in time where you think, okay, we did it, we're there, we have the civil rights, or we have the right to vote. There's all of these landmark moments that feel like, okay, we've finally done it, we're here. And it seems to me that it's always just a little something in the wording that continues to just keep the other population under our thumb, sort of.
Right. And so, it's a good point you bring up. And so here's kind of how it's worked, right? Because of this original wound, right, of not ending slavery at our founding, what's happened is over generations, you've built up this kind of anti-Black racism over time, right? And because there was money behind it for white folks. I mean, by the time Eli Whitney produces his Cotton Gin, the value of the 4 million slaves in the United States exceeded all other commercial enterprises alone, right? So let's be real clear. I mean, there was a rationale and a reason to separate Black from white, because the white folks, who founded the country understood it was in their economic interest to do so, right? And so we so failed to deal with this over generations, right? So the slaves were emancipated, right, in 1865. There was immediate pushback during Reconstruction against against the freed slaves that we talk about. In 1964, 65 with the Civil Rights Act, again, you have an immediate pushback to equality. As African Americans started to make strides, we constantly kind of rigged the game against them. And so, but I really wanted it to be clear in the movie that we were looking at that this was deliberate. And a lot of this has to do with the South, right, initially. Because and I say in the movie, and I claim it, I say it, this is me talking here. If you really look at our founding, the founding fathers were very afraid that our founding fathers were very afraid that England was going to outlaw slavery as they had done in 1772. Because it's some amazing scholarship by a professor in the film, Dr. Gerald Horne, who talks about, the English, the American colony was important to them, but they had global ambitions, and so they really weren't keeping their eye on the ball too much. And eventually they had to. But this idea that today, if you look at the backbone of the American dream, education, employment, and housing, you begin to see this generation to generation oppression of all of those, a stepping stool, if you will, to the American dream. And the South really led the political effort to do things, for instance, like deny the two prime Black vocations of the era, deny Social Security to the two prime Black vocations of the era, domestic service and sharecropping. Okay, so I don't know about your family, but my family was able to reap the benefits of being white in America and pass along not only that wealth, but the expectation of of knowing your family, where it came from. So many of these things were denied African American families. And you begin to see by 1968, when housing discrimination is outlawed, by then African Americans had not had the benefit of the great buildup, for instance, in housing wealth over the 50s and 60s, because this country exploded in wealth after the end of World War II. And, you know, so our lack of will or desire to really fundamentally address this just radical inequality. I mean, we're not even talking inequality. We're talking about continued perpetual violence against the African American community. And you continue to see that today with disproportionate brutality against African Americans, for instance, in policing. But let me point out to your listeners and your viewers something even more they hadn't thought about. Think about, for instance, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. Okay, all of that money was distributed pretty much through local establishment banking. Well, the African American community has a very up and down relationship, has had a very turbulent, they've been denied loans, housing loans, I mean, you name it, they've been discriminated against. And so if a person who owned a business wanted to get a white person who wanted to own a business with, and say they banked at Bank of America or Wells Fargo, chances are they're trying to get a loan from the clerk in the bank, or who the banker looks like they do, right? And so yes, we know you will, we'll help you with your PPP loan, because they all came through pretty much established lending institutions. African Americans don't have that history, and so they did not and are not participating, for instance, in PPP the way that white Americans, even though they are qualified for it, but they just don't have those banking relationships. And these are generalities, and there are exceptions, but that's one of the ways that you see white privilege play out in the most fundamental ways. Our nation's people in their ability to make a living, and these things have been consistently denied. And I think African Americans, and I think what we're having finally is a reckoning. I mean, how much can the African American community endure in terms of loss of income, loss of jobs with COVID, disproportionate police brutality? I mean, this was a cauldron that had been bubbling over for a long time, well before we started making our movie. But I think that we really nailed almost a news breaking narrative about what's happened, right? And we were able to do that in a 75-minute film. We're able to put all of the 400 years, in 75 minutes, which we think are the most important aspects of it. And your listeners can go to thelongshadowfilm.com and learn more about the movie and see it also.
Yeah, something in there just struck a chord with me. I was thinking, so not only has this been happening to the Black community for hundreds of years, but what I'm realizing in this journey also is that there's all sorts of ways that I, as a white person, have sort of had subliminal messages. I'm having sort of an awakening to many things I didn't realize were causing a disconnect. The phrase "I'm not a racist" has become kind of a trigger, because we're not talking about the direct I see you, I'm gonna think you're less than me. It's more of all of the subliminal things inside us. So things like the Aunt Jemima bottle, having that on the shelf and not thinking twice, is just always in there. Phrases like master bedroom just coming to light. There's things that we say every day that all of a sudden I'm realizing those were in my everyday life, and causing this disconnect that I didn't realize was happening.
Yes. And well, congratulations to you for recognizing that. And of course, I had to go from "I'm not a racist" to "I'm not an anti-Black racist. And I think one of the things that and this is not to, also, Kat, not to dismiss the terrible things that have happened to First Nations people and Latinos, for instance, in the country. I mean, those deserve their own films, right? But and it's a hard, I think it's hard, for instance, for like working class white people to say, hey, where's my privilege? I work hard, or I'm struggling to get health care like anybody else. But the first thing they need to do is really look at the facts of the history, right? And we didn't learn this stuff in school, right? Nobody really ever connected the dots. In fact, most of the nation's school books are created in Texas, and Texas believes, for the most part, that slavery was a states' rights issue. That it was a political issue, not the incredibly murderous institution that it was, right? And so our failure to deal with it has kind of numbed us to the fact that we even are racist, right? And of course we talk about, for instance, the Aunt Jemima, this recasting of slavery as as really the slaves were happy and content. They call it, I grew up with it in the South, it was called the lost cause, right? And so the slavery was recast as this institution that, was accepted, and the slaves, liked it. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, and all of that is really the result of really a disinformation campaign by the people with the vested interest, right? And so I get asked the question a lot by working class white folks, well, where's my privilege? And I say to them, well, if it's not obvious to you, the color of your skin is a distinct advantage in our society, because our culture, our society was built upon the experiences, beliefs of white folks, right? And so it was naturally skewed. Now, I think what has happened is that, and this is a great book by Ian Haney Lopez called Dog Whistle Politics, and he's in the movie. What you've seen is, as income inequality has risen in our country, you begin to see, as these are age-old issues, right? But as white folks begin to scapegoat people that are in less positions of power or look different than they do, right? It's really kind of an age-old problem. But white privilege definitely exists. And if people don't, they just don't have the information yet to understand how it's worked in their lives, or most importantly, how having Black skin in our country has worked against them. And so I think, and I've taken a lot of criticism as a white person talking about this issue. And I said, listen, I don't really, have a lot of Black scholars in the film talking about the history, and they've done some incredible new scholarship on understanding history, right? History is a living thing. But what I wanted to do is I made the film for everybody, Kat, but I really wanted to speak to white folks to say, here's a history you really probably don't understand. And anytime I have, I get online backlash a lot. And I said, I am happy to debate this with you, but you have to watch my film. Because until you are informed, and I know, unless you are like yourself, someone who actively seeks out the correct information, who is psychologically aware enough to know that something's not quite right, then you are going off of those things you were talking about, stereotypes and these old ideas that really aren't accurate. So I'm happy to debate anyone as long as they watch my movie.
I love that. And in fact, I was in one of those debates on Facebook, of course, the other day, and my first response was, go watch The Long Shadow and then talk to me. So I've already been able to use your movie as a tool. I wanted to talk about history lessons really quick. You make mention of the Haitian War and how you didn't learn about it in school. And what I'm realizing is there's a lot of other things we weren't taught in school. And part of that might be that I'm in California. I I feel like the South probably shifted history a little bit. In California, I think we just skip over it completely. Not to say that's happening now. I feel like in my childhood, in my education, I feel like I wasn't taught a lot of these history lessons. So I guess where I'm going with this is a very good jumping off point is this film.
Well, thank you. In terms of history, right? So that's what we wanted to do, right? We wanted to connect the dots of the history to show this pattern, right, of anti-black, institutional anti-black racism. But for instance, the book that was written, this isn't in the film, but the book about my uncle, 6 times removed, there was a Pulitzer Prize winning book written about him by a guy named Edward Mays. Well, Edward Mays was a Pulitzer Prize winning author, but he also led probably one of the bloodiest, most awful lynchings in the history, in the 1950s, in the history of Virginia, right? And so what's in the news right now are the monuments, right? And I don't know how many, probably less monuments in California than in the South, right? But what those were erected towards the beginning of the 20th century, from 1910 to like 1930. I mean, Civil War is way over. It's like they were really erected to remind African Americans who were beginning to make, because there was a labor shortage in the United States because of World War One, African Americans were moving from the South to the North and the Midwest, and they were getting jobs in slaughterhouses and car manufacturing plants, things like that. And these were really erected, these monuments were really erected as a monument to white power, really. They were really designed to keep African Americans in their place, knowing their station in life. And of course, we go into probably one of the most racist presidents in the world was Woodrow Wilson, who actually made a point to demote African Americans who were working in the offices of the White House, demoting them to the kitchens and being chauffeurs and things like that. So I didn't learn that in school. We barely got, we got the Emancipation, we got the Emancipation Proclamation, the kind of basics, but really what's important is to connect the dots of the history to show this indisputable pattern of race. Really, no other country in the United States, with the exception of Brazil, institutionalized slavery the way that the United States did. And incidentally, we didn't learn about the Haitian Revolution because Haiti was the first Black-led republic in the world. And as we talk about, there was a violent suppression in Haiti by whites against Blacks, because there were slave owners like my ancestors had so many slaves. They were afraid that Haiti was going to touch off more slave revolts in the United States. And by the way, there were a lot more slave revolts in the United States than is commonly known. There were a lot more institutional pushback from African Americans, and at any time they were given opportunity in the United States, African Americans took it. Like right after Civil War, we have three Blacks elected to the Senate. We wouldn't have one Black elected to the Senate again until the 1960s. So these are things that were not taught to us. And fortunately for your viewers and listeners, you can learn so much about it in my movie. So it's on Amazon Prime, Tubi TV. And if you have a public library card, you can see it at Canopy with a K. And you can get it from us on our website at thelongshadowfilm.com.
And I just wanted to ask you about a couple other things before I let you go. One of the things you just mentioned was the lynchings, and you had some actual historical photographs of lynchings. this is a couple parter. One, it's really hard. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. It's hard to watch. It's hard to see,
Yeah,
but it's so
I know.
important to see it, because I don't think you hear the word lynching, you see the rope in Bubba Wallace's garage, and it's easy to dismiss it as a symbol, and it wasn't that bad, maybe, or maybe you picture old westerns where they're hanging people. This is completely different than that. Can you touch on that history just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for me to even research and find those photos and put them in the movie. And we had a debate about it, about how much to cut into the movie with those shots. And there's one particularly awful image of two African Americans that were lynched from a bridge in Mississippi, and one of them clearly was a woman. So we've acknowledged that there were close to 6,000 lynchings in the United States, and likely there were thousands more. And in some places, these were people brought their children to watch. And as Professor Litwack says in the movie, you almost, when you see this and you understand the history, you cannot believe it happened in your own country. But like in 1955, a World War II, a Black World War II veteran was lynched in South Georgia. He was a returning war hero, was lynched in 1955 in Georgia. Right. And so this was it was meant to inspire terror, right? Particularly by the Ku Klux Klan. It was meant to really terrorize the local African-American population. And I think only recently, I mean, we talk about it in the movie, but I think in one state, they only recently outlawed lynching. FDR had to tell the NAACP because of the resistance from the South to an anti-lynching bill in 1938. We couldn't even agree to outlaw lynching in 1938, and many more thousands died. So it is a history. All of this is history that we need to reckon with. And as I said in my TED Talk, this is not just an African-American problem that they should bear the burden of. This is an American problem that we as white Americans need to claim. And we need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to figure out, we need to get some money to the African-American community. We need to help refurbish their communities. We did it with COVID. We did it with Japanese Americans. After World War II, we gave each Japanese American family $30,000. There's a way to do it. I want everyone listening to support, Barbara Lee of California has proposed a kind of South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a Healing and Truth Commission, I think she calls it. So let's make this an issue of national importance and put it in the appropriate, setting so we can study it. Right? I understand the frustration in the streets, and we totally are on the record and will always support peaceful protests. I don't know, personally, I have to tell you personally, I believe these monuments to racism and lynching and all these things should come down, but let's put them in a museum and let's put plaques out in front of these people and say what this was really about, so that we can all learn as a country and accept and really make a difference, and to right some of these old wrongs. And I think until we do that, it's just going to continue. The wound is going to continue to fester.
Well, I feel like I could talk to you all day, so I have to stop the questions now. This has been
It's
Hollywood.
been delightful.
Yeah, this has been Hollywood and Sip. I'm still Kat Smith, and I've been talking to Frances Causey, the filmmaker behind The Long Shadow. And let's give out your links again. And also, the TED Talk that she mentioned is on the homepage of her website, so you can find that there. And I encourage you to watch that along with the movie.
Great. Thank you, Kat. I appreciate it. As a small independent film company, we appreciate the chance to let your listeners know they can download the film and get a DVD at thelongshadowfilm.com if you want to buy from a small independent company. We hope you do. But it's also, the film is, we have a 3-year license with PBS, so really encourage your local PBS stations to run the movie, to air the movie, and then you can watch it for free at Tubi, T-U-I, Tubi and Prime, and then also with a public library card, you can watch the film at Canopy, Kanopy.com. So.
And then I also just want to tag on to the end of this. If you're a parent at home with kids asking you all kinds of questions, my other show is Sonoma Kids Ask the Experts, and it airs on Saturdays at noon. And my most recent guest was Celeste Winders of Strategic Education. Oh, I'm forgetting the third word, I think partnership, but she's a local advocate for kids in the school system. And she did such a fantastic job of answering all of your questions about racism and Black Lives Matter and protesting and all of those things that you have questions about from the news recently. And they've already aired by the time you hear this on the radio, but you can go find her interviews on YouTube. You can search for Sonoma Kids Asking, you'll find the playlist. And I encourage parents to also, have discussions with your kids and watch that and find out if they have more questions. And for the grown-ups, go watch The Long Shadow. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you very much, Kat. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.